The payphone receiver clicked back into its cradle, and Johnny Cash stood in the vestibule of a Chattanooga church before sunrise, not breathing. The lawyer's voice was still in his ear, even though the line was dead. The vestibule smelled like old hymn books and floor polish. Outside, a single car passed on the wet street, its tires hissing. He had been told the church would be unlocked at 5. He had asked the pastor in a phone call 2 days earlier if he could sit in the sanctuary alone before he drove the rest of the way to Franklin, Kentucky. He had not told June he was making this stop. He had not told anyone. He pushed the inner door open with the flat of his hand. The sanctuary was dark except for one bulb burning above the pulpit, and the first thin gray was just starting to come through the stained glass on the east side. He walked down the center aisle in his Sunday shoes, slow because the wood floors caught every step. The pew was the third from the front on the left, and he chose it for a reason no one would ever ask him about. He sat down. He laid his suit jacket beside him. He set his hat on top of the jacket. In the next 16 minutes, no, in the next hour, he was going to sit here and try to figure out what kind of man was going to stand up from this pew, because the man who had sat down was not, in the end, the man he wanted to be when he walked into Franklin at noon. He had not told June about the call, and he was not sure yet whether he would. The lawyer's name was something Italian he could not now remember. He worked out of an office in Los Angeles. He represented Vivian Liberto, who was no longer Vivian Cash, and who, by the legal papers signed 2 months earlier, was no longer his wife. He had picked up the payphone on the second ring because he had been awake anyway, sitting in the rented room of the rented motel with his shoes already on. He thought it would be Marshall Grant or Luther Perkins or somebody asking him where he was. It was not. It was a voice from California he had never heard before, polite, careful, sober, calling him on the morning of his wedding day. Johnny did not say anything back. He stood in the vestibule of the motel office, holding the receiver for so long that the night clerk had looked up from his magazine. Then he had said quietly, "Thank you for telling me." And he had hung up. And he had walked across the parking lot to his car, and he had driven the 11 minutes through the empty Chattanooga streets to this church, and he had not breathed properly the whole way. Now he sat in the pew. He put his elbows on his knees. He laced his fingers together and pressed his forehead down onto them, and he started to do the thing he had been doing more and more in the last year, which was to say the 4 names quietly to himself, in order, oldest to youngest. Roseanne, Kathy, Cindy, Tara. He said them the way you check a pocket for keys. He said them because saying them was the only thing he knew how to do that was not a lie. The lawyer had not called to threaten him. He had called because one of the girls had asked, that morning, if her daddy still remembered what she looked like. That was the sentence. That was the sentence that had been sitting in his chest for the 11-minute drive and the long walk down the aisle in his Sunday shoes. He did not know which one of them had asked. The lawyer had not said. The lawyer had only said that he thought before this day went any further, before any vows were exchanged in any church in Kentucky, that Mr. Cash should hear it. He had said it without anger. He had said it without anger. He had said it like a man who had a daughter himself. Johnny lifted his head. The east window was a little brighter now. He could see the shape of the cross above the pulpit. He could see the offering plates stacked on a small table at the side. He could see his own breath very faintly in the cold air of the sanctuary. He thought about Roseanne, who was 12 and who had stopped asking him on the phone when he was coming home. He thought about Kathy, who was almost 10. He thought about Kathy. He thought about Tara, who had been 3 the last time he had picked her up and who was now 5, and who, the lawyer had not said but he understood, was very probably the one who had asked the question. What he was praying for was not forgiveness, and that was the part that frightened him. He had already asked for forgiveness. He had asked for it in motel rooms in 1965 and 1966 and 1967 when he was coming down off the pills and the world looked like the inside of a tin can. He had asked for it the night in Nickajack Cave when he had crawled in to die and had not died. He had asked God for forgiveness so many times in the last 3 years that the asking had worn a groove in him. He believed, sitting in that pew, that the forgiveness had been given. He believed it the way a man believes the floor will hold him up. That was not the thing he was sitting here trying to settle. What he was trying to settle was something else. He was trying to figure out if a man could marry a woman at noon and still belong in some real and unbreakable way to the 4 girls in California he was not going to be able to raise. He was trying to figure out if the vows he was about to say at the front of this church, the new vows, the second vows, the vows to June, were going to erase the vows he had broken to Vivian, or whether the broken vows were still going to be his to carry like a debt that no court could discharge. He took the small folded paper out of his inside pocket and held it without opening it. It was the list of names. He had been carrying it for a year. June had seen him take it out once in a hotel kitchen in Memphis, and she had not asked. June had a way of not asking. He thought about June now for the first time since the phone had rung. She was probably already awake in Franklin. She was probably with her mother. She was probably letting Maybelle fuss with the back of her hair. She was choosing that morning to marry a man who had 4 daughters by another woman and an addiction record long enough to fill a courtroom, and a brother in the ground in DS, Arkansas, and a father who had told him once that the wrong son had died. She knew all of it. She had walked into all of it with her eyes wide open. She had decided, somewhere along the line, that she was going to be the one who stayed. He owed her something, not just the vows, something else. He owed her honesty about who he was bringing with him into this marriage. He was bringing 4 little girls who were not going to live in his house. He was bringing a first wife he had hurt in ways that would not heal. He was bringing a faith that had pulled him out of a cave and a body that still woke up sometimes wanting the pills. He opened the folded paper. The 4 names were written in his own hand, in pencil, the letters careful, the way he had taught himself to write in DS as a boy. He looked at them for a long time. The light was coming up faster now. The cross above the pulpit was no longer a shape. It was a thing. A man does not stop being a father the day he becomes a husband to someone else. He said it quietly into his hands, into the cold pew air, into the empty Chattanooga sanctuary. He said it the way he had said the names. He said it because he needed to hear it in his own voice before he heard the preacher say anything else 3 hours from now in Kentucky. He said it, and the saying of it settled something in him that the years of asking forgiveness had not been able to settle. The forgiveness was about the past. This was about what he was carrying into the future. She did not know it yet, but he had already decided the one thing he would say to her before they walked back down the aisle. He folded the paper. He put it back into his inside pocket, against his chest, where it would stay through the ceremony and through the long drive afterward and through the rest of the year. He picked up his hat. He picked up his jacket. He stood in the aisle of the pew, but he did not yet leave it. He looked at the cross one more time. He thought about Jack, his brother, who would have been 36 years old that spring. He thought about Vivian, who he hoped, in some part of her life he was no longer welcome in, would find a man who was easier to love. He thought about the lawyer in Los Angeles who had picked up a phone at sunrise on his behalf, and he thanked him again, silently, where the man could not hear it. He walked back up the aisle. The east windows were full of light now. The vestibule was no longer dark. He pushed open the door of the church, and the cold Chattanooga morning came in around him, and he stood on the top step for a moment, settling his hat. Whatever vows he was about to say at the front of this church, he would not be unsaying the 4 small names already written on his life. He would say them at night, every night, in some private room of whatever house he and June lived in for the rest of his days. He would say them on tour buses. He would say them in motel rooms. He would say them backstage. He had figured that out in the hour he had just spent in the pew, and it was the only thing he had needed to figure out. He stood up from the pew, a husband twice over and a father still.